This is a program about China, so why are we beginning in Rolla, Missouri, showing you a bunch of middle-aged blue-collar workers wandering around a job fair?
Do you have any office positions open?
Currently,
No.
Because China is where their jobs went. China, which relates how exactly to Mexican migrant workers picking cotton in North Carolina? Well, that's where the cotton is going. China.
Sit down, please. Boys and girls, I feel a little cold. I think I need some clothes.
Don't worry, that North Carolina cotton will be back as soon as Chinese workers have milled it and cut it and turned it into It won't occur to these children for some years to come, but they are being trained to compete in the global marketplace.
I used to work at Briggs & Stratton, and I'm unemployed, and I'm looking for a job.
American unemployed, Chinese children, Mexican migrant workers. They don't know one another, they may not even care about one another, but as you'll see, they're all having an impact on one another's lives.
A 7.9 magnitude earthquake hit in mid-afternoon.
Schools and dormitories have all collapsed.
Puts the death toll more than 55,000.
The spectacle of a profound national tragedy has a way of erasing differences. We can all relate to people who never had much and who've lost what little they had. There, but for the grace of God, we say. The earthquake struck a region of China's heartland that the government has targeted for growth. All we've been seeing these last couple of months, though, what has engaged our attention and compassion, is the massive destruction. The loss of so many homes, so many schools, the death of so many tens of thousands, so many children. We look at these scenes, and even those among us who feel no connection or even kinship with the Chinese can empathize, there but for the grace of God. We are all vulnerable, and these days we are all interdependent. We've been working for months in southwestern China, near where the earthquake struck. Our base was the biggest city that most Americans have never heard of, Chongqing. That's where it is on the map, along the Yangtze River, about 1,500 miles southwest of Shanghai. It's a city with an attitude, a place that has something to prove. And once we've shown you a few of the things that are happening in Chongqing, you'll begin to understand why China and the United States might have a very difficult time getting along without each other anymore. The signs of interdependence are everywhere. The city is blossoming with the icons of American brands like Ford, Ethan Allen, and Walmart. And that's merely scratching the surface. Love it or hate it, our economic futures seem irrevocably linked. It's a reality. Get used to it. Let me set the scene for you. A downtown square in Chongqing ringed with upscale shops, most of them selling products that would be completely out of reach, unthinkably expensive for most Chinese. And yet, there is a new and rapidly growing class of Chinese who can and do shop here. People for whom price is no object. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of such people. A huge, new, and expanding market for high-end Western goods. But China's new wealth and its growing middle class are still dwarfed by its hundreds of millions who live just at the edge of survival. The brutal truth is that China can barely take care of its people. There are simply too many, which is why you see murals all over the countryside proclaiming the government's one-child policy. That's been the law for decades now. To this day, the government will impose a hefty fine, sometimes amounting for the poor to half a year's salary or more, on a couple that has a second child. If anything, that has made children especially precious to the Chinese. Perhaps the worst unintended consequence of that one-child policy is that the earthquake left so many families childless. If they're still young enough to have children, and if they can prove their loss, those families will now be granted the right to try again. They love children, they really do. But their government is trying to cope with the largest population in the world, competing for very limited resources. You need to be able to look past the images of regimented youngsters wearing their symbolic red kerchiefs. There are tens of millions of these children and hundreds of millions of their desperately poor adult relatives. They all need to be employed and housed and fed. And communism didn't do it. What's beginning to do the job is capitalism. As for that massive population base of poor people, they are China's weakness and its strength. Call it the Chinese paradox. They are little engines of ambition.
X, Y, Z. Okay, very good.
All but vibrating with the earnest desire to succeed. And all over China, from earliest childhood on, English and computer literacy are being drummed into their little heads. China has big plans for this generation. Their skills will far exceed those of their parents, but that's down the road. For the time being, China's most significant contribution to the global economy remains cheap, reliable labor. Line them up, snap it on, plug it in, check it out, send it off. Snap it on, plug it in, check it out, send it off. Snap it on, plug it in, check it out, send it off. Snap it on, plug it in, check it out, send it off. It's an endless, mindless, bottomless pit of a job. Anyone who's ever worked an assembly line can tell you about the pressure and the boredom and the fatigue. But if they don't like it, and many of them don't, there is a vast labor force of Chinese country people, peasants and farmers, more of them than the combined populations of the United States and all of Europe, desperate to take their places. And that is where it all begins. In November of 2007, a demolition company in Las Vegas, Nevada, fulfilled its contract to bring down the old Frontier Casino and Hotel. It was done in quintessentially American style. Quickly, efficiently, totally. The debris loaded onto trucks and headed for landfill. What this is not is a simple demolition project. This is a Chinese-style recovery operation. Buried within each of these concrete beams is a long, valuable piece of steel rebar that can be melted down, recast, and reused. When labor is plentiful and cheap enough, it makes good economic sense to chip the mortar off each individual brick so that it can be reused in the building of a new structure. These women make the equivalent of $1 to $2 a day. Chip off the mortar, gather up the bricks, hoist them on your shoulder, dump them in the truck. Chip off the mortar, gather up the bricks, hoist them on your shoulder, dump them in the truck. The men here make more than the women. Still only $3 to $4 a day, but they consider that good pay compared to what they can earn at home, which is essentially nothing. Most of these people were subsistence farmers who just barely fed themselves and their families. In a good year, they might have enough food left over to raise a pig or two that they could slaughter or sell at market.
If I stay home working in farmland, I won't make money.
If you're looking for a job in construction, this is the place to be. It's estimated that 1.5 million people here are working on construction-related jobs. It's already a big city, about 13.5 million, but it's part of an enormous municipality. A region the size of Austria, with an overall population of more than 30 million people. The goal over the next 10 to 15 years is to expand the city out and draw the people in until Chongqing is a mega city of 20 million with only 10 million or so people left in the remaining countryside. But the larger goal is to turn Chongqing into an industrial hub, an international center of industry and trade. The city has already attracted significant American investment, like this Briggs & Stratton plant, where Chinese workers are now on the assembly line building American engines.
Just turned my life upside down. Gotta look for a new career.
Those engines used to be built here at this shuttered Briggs & Stratton plant in Rolla, Missouri.
I hate the fact that it cost me my job, but, you know, businesses are out to make money.
We have a couple of openings on the...
And while the move was good for the corporate bottom line, it badly hurt some of the workers, especially the older ones who thought they'd retire at Briggs. Now, like awkward teenagers at a prom, they find themselves shuffling through a job fair.
It's going to be hard for me to get a job because I'm 61 years old. So far, every place I've applied for says I'm overqualified. You know, a polite way saying you're too old.
I'm Pam Leeser. I'm a dislocated worker from Briggs & Stratton.
Pam Leeser had been working at Briggs & Stratton for almost 11 years. She's clearly uncomfortable shopping for a new job. She never thought she'd have to. Until the day a delegation from Chongqing, China, came calling.
They had a translator with them. And my boss come up and he asked me if I would care to explain to them what my job was and how I did my job. And I looked at him and I told him, no, I will not. I just knew that down the road I was going to be losing my job.
Which is exactly what did happen to about 480 Briggs & Stratton workers on September 28, 2007.
Jim, I don't know if you were kidding me before or exaggerating, but you were talking at one point about being the most hated guy at the home plant in Missouri. True?
I think most hated was a bit of an exaggeration.
Jim Marceau runs Briggs & Stratton's operation in Chongqing, China.
There are a lot of people were concerned with us building a factory in China that it would take jobs from the United States. This plant was built so we could try to make engines inexpensively enough where we could sell in the Asia market. It wasn't made to take jobs from the States.
Which is true. That was the plan. But the engines remained too expensive for China and for the rest of the Asian market. So now you've got Chinese workers assembling the engines in Chongqing, and even with the additional cost of shipping them halfway around the world, there's still a bargain in Europe and the U.S., where they're powering lawnmowers, snowblowers, and generators. What's involved is just a fraction of the overall Briggs & Stratton operation, but Chongqing's gain was Rolla, Missouri's loss.
Well, after our last engine was built, everybody was gone. I mean, people wanted to get out of there. But I was one of them, stayed till 3 o'clock. I thought, they're paying me for my whole 8 hours.
$11.17 an hour is what Pam earned. Not a ton of money in Rolla, Missouri, or in the 3 other towns with Briggs factories, but it's a living wage. The fact is that Briggs & Stratton has kept 90% of its manufacturing in the United States, and that profitable plant in Chongqing is helping to keep the company competitive.
The labor is 5% of what it costs in the States, or 10% or 20%. That's where you save your money.
Well, I thought I was really stable at Briggs & Stratton. I thought I'd stay there the rest of my life and retire there. Well, now I'm 50 and I have to start all over again looking for another job.
Well, it's nice to meet you. You too. Good luck.
What do you say to someone caught in the backwash of the global marketplace?
You may want to try hiking. Have you found that?
Or, for that matter, to someone on the other side of the world trying to catch the next wave?
The basic equipment you need for hiking is simple.
Li Dan is 17 years old, and her parents are peasant farmers. Their combined annual income is less than $600, roughly half of which goes toward the payment of Li Dan's tuition, food, and housing at this boarding school in Chongqing. She is living the American dream of a better life than the one her parents have known.
直接读几遍吗？
This is the fabric room of one of America's biggest and best-known furniture manufacturers. But if you look closely, you'll see that even Ethan Allen in Maiden, North Carolina, has integrated Chinese-made components into its supply chain. Thousands of rolls of fabric awaiting the day when they will be turned into custom-made upholstery. Made in China. Made in China. Made in China. Very possibly, though, spun out of cotton from here in North Carolina.
All of our textile mills have moved overseas, either to South America or China.
Linwood Vick is the foreman on his father's farm.
There are very few mills left in North Carolina, so all of our cotton is now being exported.
The cotton and the tobacco grown on this farm are being exported, and the labor force is being imported. Legal migrant workers from Mexico.
We use migrant workers from Mexico because they are a reliable workforce. They do an excellent job. Our local labor in North Carolina does not want to work the hours or do the hard work. It's extremely hard work.
That's your basic engine of today's global economy, cheap labor. Either it migrates to where the work is, or the work migrates to where there is an abundant supply of cheap labor. What they are assembling at this Ethan Allen furniture plant is what the company calls the Pratt sofa. It's a pretty expensive piece of furniture, costs a couple of $1,000s. And the base, this part with the hand-turned legs, is also made in China. Anna Rocket, who's 23, does quality control.
I'm an inspector here at Ethan Allen. Basically what I do is I clip strings, make sure the piece of furniture looks perfect, does it have any holes in it, does it have any mishaps in it before we send it out the door.
Anna earns about $20 an hour, which is roughly what 17-year-old Mu Wenjing earns in a week, doing essentially the same job, quality control, on these boom boxes which are bound for the United States. Walmart, to be precise. What confuses Mu Wenjing is that Americans get to buy cheap imports while she can't afford anything made outside of China.
That's what she felt the most unfair thing. It's very expensive here, but why in America it's so cheap?
Because here in China, people work for very low pay.
Oh, do you guys get high pay?
Yeah, we get high pay. Yeah.
How much?
Too much. Maybe you should be a television reporter. What do you think?
Do you think yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, because, she said staying in this factory is a waste of her talent, actually.
A waste of her talent. I like that.
Which is pretty much the way Anna Rocket back at the Ethan Allen plant in North Carolina sees things too.
It's just a bunch of different things that you have to look for It's kind of almost a very tedious job at times.
But here's the kicker. The Pratt sofa that Randy Smith is working on here, that's headed to China, Chongqing to be precise. China's growing middle class has got plenty of money, and they appreciate good American workmanship.
I think it's wonderful. As long as we manufacture the furniture here, we can sell it to anybody we want. That's fine. I have no problem with it.
The balance of trade, though, between China and the United States remains totally out of whack. Americans buy vastly more from China than the other way around. Mu Wenjing's boss, the man who manages this plant assembling tens of thousands of DVD players and boomboxes, was born in Taiwan and worked for 15 years in Orange County, California. Matt Shaw's biggest outlet is Walmart.
Why would Walmart come all the way to China to buy these things here?
Because what I can tell you right now is today, this type of DVD player we provided to Walmart, we have the lowest cost in the world.
The lowest cost?
Yes. I think that's the whole purpose.
So the lowest costs means you're paying the lowest salaries in the world.
It means we have lowest salaries. It means we have a higher efficiency.
And few American firms understand those efficiencies quite as well as Apple. The company boosts its bottom line with the huge savings that come with the label assembled in China. But it's the company's design prowess and marketing savvy that motivates their consumers. That's why, for example, every iPod box carries the words "Designed by Apple in California." When you buy an iPod for $299, Apple makes a profit of $80. The Taiwanese company that assembles the parts in mainland China earns about $4. The same dynamic that works for Apple also works for Walmart, but on a much larger scale and at much lower prices. In fact, it's the Walmart credo: buy cheap, sell cheap. And it's precisely what attracts these Mexican migrants who work on the Vick family farm in North Carolina.
Every Saturday afternoon and Sunday, they go to Walmart and spend it, whether they're buying their groceries, their clothes, or their toys for their kids.
Walmart's slogan, "Everyday low prices," could almost serve as an anthem for the global economy. These Mexican migrant workers are one strand of a complex fabric that makes Walmart possible. On this trip, they're stocking up in preparation for their return home to Mexico. And if they take one of these boomboxes home as a gift, it's a good deal, only $19.98. Remember that sassy 17-year-old with a baseball cap and an attitude? But she's certainly not making a whole lot of money. And neither, for that matter, is her boss. He understands that Walmart has some major expenses to absorb.
They have to pay the shipping from Shanghai to LA. They have to pay their stores. They have to pay their employee, all of their overheads, of course.
But if I said to you, at the end of the day, who makes more money on each of these DVDs, you or Walmart?
Of course, Walmart.
Moving manufacturing to China also benefits Briggs & Stratton. The company's doing just fine with its plant in Chongqing. Of course, that's no comfort to Pam Leeser, whose job was outsourced to China.
We're going to wind up having no jobs. There's not going to be nothing here in the United States. It's all going to be overseas.
Okay, nice to meet you.
I'm just hoping that the government wakes up and starts seeing what it's doing to United States citizens.
Of course, even Pam Leeser shops at Walmart.
We shopped at Walmart today in Rolla, my husband and I did. We could save money by shopping at Walmart instead of getting the items here in this little town.
So in other words, the Walmart's cheaper?
Yes.
The reason that everything's so cheap at Walmart is because things are made in China.
So in a way, you benefit from it?
Yes.
So how do you feel about that?
If Pam Leeser doesn't have an answer for globalization's adverse effect on American workers, well, No one else does either. At age 50, she is out of work and looking for a job. You can hardly expect her to be happy about the bargains at Walmart when those are largely the product of cheap foreign labor, especially from China. After all, that's how she came to lose her job in the first place. Although it's still morning and he has a field of lotus roots to harvest, Li Xingfu is slightly drunk.
I'm so tired of him. He's such a pain. He loves drinking.
That's Mr. Li's wife, Qinggong Lu.
We don't have a good relationship. We're staying together because of our daughter.
If the daughter looks slightly familiar to you, you're right. You saw Li Dan at school, in English class. Every weekend, she comes home to her parents' village. At the beginning of every week, she boards a commuter bus to another village, where she takes a tiny three-wheel taxi, which bumps its way through farmland to another bus stop. There, she catches a Chongqing municipal bus, which drops her at a stop near her boarding school. A school which her father and his family think is a waste of money.
According to their view, she should have stopped receiving an education a long time ago. They think it is useless for a girl to be schooled. The son should be educated. I feel it is really unfair.
Everything that attracts foreign investment to China rests on the foundation of cheap labor, and Qinggong Lu, staggering under the weight of these lotus roots, may be a perfect transitional figure. 6 and sometimes 7 mornings a week during harvest season, she carries 120 pounds of produce, which is roughly what she weighs, to market. She's happy if the day's work yields $3. After all expenses are paid, renting the land, buying the seed, the daily bus fare to town, the family nets $570 a year. Half of that goes toward Li Dan's expenses at boarding school. "15-year-old Kellen Zhang lives a far more privileged life in Potomac, Maryland, but she too has to cope with family separation. Her father is often gone for long stretches. Dr. He Jiang has moved back to China after living in Canada and then in the United States for 20 years. For 8 years, he worked as an AIDS researcher at the National Institutes of Health. 4 years ago, Dr. Jiang decided to establish his own lab. He's still trying to find a more effective treatment for AIDS, but now he's set up shop in Chongqing. Early every morning, he's on a conference call with his family.
Hi, honey.
Hey.
In Maryland, it's late afternoon,
So how are you guys doing?
Well, they said that they won.
and his son and daughter are just back from high school.
On the stats sheet.
Dr. Jiang's AIDS treatment has now entered the human trial stage in China. Between supervising those and spending time with his family in Potomac, he spends a lot of his life in airports and making that long commute. In Chongqing, he pays 1/5 what he did in Maryland for 10 times as much space. It's cheap labor, cheap facilities, cooperation from the government, and a huge base of people who have every disease known to man.
Yes. In fact, the major pharmaceutical companies are now in China building up their R&D center.
Is this good for America or bad for America?
I think overall in the long run is good for everybody. Because of a lower cost, eventually it's going to lower the medical care, the drug price is going to go down.
And even with the pressure to keep prices on exports down, salaries for Chinese workers are going up. And management? Well, management is doing very nicely by anyone's standards. Seen here driving a luxury car through their gated community in Chongqing and into the driveway of their elegant new home, homemaker Zhang Xiaojing, her husband Ding Ming, and their 2-year-old daughter Ding Sihan. Mr. Ding is an executive at a thriving company that makes electrical components for motorcycle firms like Kawasaki and Suzuki. But Mrs. Zhang is rightly proud of her role in designing and decorating their new house. From a pretty in pink room for her daughter to the spacious family bathroom. Note the toddler's mini toilet. To the high-quality kitchen fixtures and top-of-the-line American appliances, it's a house fit for one of China's new captains of industry. Today is delivery day for some long-awaited new furniture, featuring both a red carpet and white glove delivery service, literally. As for the couch being so meticulously unwrapped, so gently, dare we say, lovingly moved and placed, that's the very couch that was assembled and upholstered in North Carolina, where it was placed on the legs and base shipped from China. And now, here it is, Ethan Allen's Pratt sofa, complete and in place at its final home in Chongqing, with Mrs. Zhang and Mr. Ding, who know a nice piece of American craftsmanship when they see it.
American products always look good, and the quality is always good too. And you know, my first car was a Buick, which drove very well. And our new American refrigerator has big double doors, and it's really well built. We're told you can even kick it.
Yes, my father told me we can pass this refrigerator down to our grandchildren.
Right. Both the fridge and the couch could be passed down through several generations. And they match the style of our house. That's why we chose them.
Socialism's dream of a classless society got lost somewhere between Mrs. Zhang's McMansion and Jingonglu's tiny farmhouse. But China is becoming a place where even gaps like that can be bridged.
Life is hard. What can we do? I'm planning to go out and look for a job in January or February.
Does your husband know that yet?
No, he doesn't know.
What do you think will be better about life in the city?
All I know is that I want to work for myself. I don't know how bright the future will be. As long as I can make enough to support myself, I'll be fine. I really don't get on with him. I'm so annoyed by him. If it hadn't been for my daughter, I would have left him a long time ago.
Jingonglu's chances of getting rich in her village of Dragon Spring or in the city were always slim and none. But China's experiment with capitalism offers a genuine window of hope to Li Dan, her daughter, the one with the education.
Go to see the field.
Chen Jiming is what is known in Chongqing as a bang bang man. In another time and place, he and his crew might have been called coolies. When the riverboats churn their way up and down the Yangtze, carrying foreign tourists to and from the scenic Three Gorges, Mr. Chun and the others carry their baggage up and down the embankment here in Chongqing. They don't know much about Americans, but what they know, they like.
Americans are great. Because their economy is more developed, they are more generous than the Germans and the French.
The Americans have lots of money?
Americans give good tips. They are very generous.
Tell me what you know about America.
As far as I know, America is the most advanced and also the richest country in the world.
It may have occurred to Mr. Chun that Americans and Chinese, who have been enemies, may one day be bitter rivals again.
And what about China? You think the day will come when China and America have to fight?
That is impossible. The relationship between America and China is pretty good right now. That won't happen.
Whether out of courtesy or intuition, Mr. Chun understands mutual interests when he sees them. As does American investment banker Simon Erblich.
America has to figure out what it wants to do here. China's growing fast, and they're opening up their doors. So either China in the long run is going to be a competitor of America's or a partner.
Both?
Or both, because being a partner with China, at the end of the day, is going to be good for everybody. Both financially speaking, politically speaking, from a humanitarian standpoint, that is a win-win situation for everybody. And you're not going to be able to avoid the efficiencies of market, the cheaper labor that's going to be available all over the world, and you can't keep running away from that.
Take silk making, for example, an ancient Chinese industry. These silkworm cocoons, nurtured on thousands of acres of Chinese mulberry bushes, are about to be relieved of their silken thread. They enjoy, thanks to Simon Erblich, a small, humble place on Wall Street. Another thread, if you'll pardon the pun, in the fabric of Sino-American relations.
So, what do you know about silk factories?
To be honest, not much.
But then it's not their expertise on silk production that makes Simon Erblich and his partner Dan Hirsch interesting to the Chinese. Simon and Dan find companies that can be listed on American stock exchanges. Let's say an antiquated silk factory that needs money to buy new technology. Chinese entrepreneur takes American investment, updates factory. Chinese government provides incentives, silk factory blossoms. In theory, everybody gets rich.
They were valued very low, $1 million, $2 million here in China.
So that's what you see as
an opportunity.
Shooting fish in a barrel.
Exactly.
Win-win?
Win-win.
For whom?
Everybody.
Just as one day, when millions of Chinese peasants have been drawn into the cities, the remaining farmers will start using engines, perhaps even Briggs & Stratton engines, to work larger plots of land.
When you have less farmers trying to do the same amount of work without the actual people, you know, they're going to have to start buying automated products to help them.
If I said to you, Jim, is there any way of untangling the Chinese-American relationship? Are we and the Chinese, for good or ill,
yeah, I think it's meshed. It's got to be meshed forever. I mean, if you look at the amount of companies in the United States that rely on Chinese-made products or Chinese-made materials, you know, if you try to pull that apart, you would have so many companies with complete loss of supply of what they do. So I think it's something that will only get more involved with China as time goes on.
The family-owned Bernhardt Furniture Company in Lenoir, North Carolina, moved some of its operations to China more than 25 years ago. That, too, says CEO Alex Bernhardt, has been a win-win proposition.
The work ethic comes to mind immediately. The people are diligent, work eagerly. They're eager to learn. We've been able to instill in them some of the quality aspirations and standards that Bernhardt has. So it's clearly today it's the country of choice for us.
Bernhardt explains to his American workers that outsourcing to China allowed him to keep plants open in the United States, while keeping his overall prices competitive. It's what he calls that Walmart thing.
I shop at Walmart. I expect they do. I expect we're all using televisions and shoes and belts and cameras and clothing that is made somewhere else in the world. And they understand that the consumers today want great design, great quality, and a great price. And whether it's sad or just reality, the country of origin is not of great importance to consumers in America.
Bargains for the American consumer, quality exports for the growing Chinese middle class. Remember Ms. Zhang, the woman who bought the Ethan Allen couch? She drives a BMW from Germany, wears a Burberry shawl from England, and carries a Louis Vuitton handbag from France. She's paying her weekly visit to Walmart, which in Chongqing at least is one of the upscale places to shop. There are delicacies to be found here. Chicken feet, far superior to the local variety, imported from North Carolina. If you're trying to get a handle on the Sino-American relationship, Walmart's not a bad place to start. In America, where consumers are looking for cheap foreign imports, and now in China, where the Walmart name conveys a totally different image of quality and high-priced foreign imports. It's more than a toehold. Capitalism, of all things, has established a solid foothold in China. How about that? When the earthquake hit, China demonstrated one of the strengths of an authoritarian government. 100,000 troops mobilized and on the scene within hours, and China's prime minister on hand to oversee the situation. Vincent Lo is one of China's billionaire developers.
Democracy, of course, it sounds good, but in practice, it doesn't always bring you the results.
If you listen to a young westernized fashion photographer, the Chinese government's approach is working.
I have to say that I love my country, but I don't love my government. I trust my government.
That in our next broadcast. The superstitious, and there are many of them in China, believe that huge natural catastrophes are always precursors of great change. What must they be thinking? A disastrous earthquake, China about to host its first Olympic Games, and the entire world is watching. Something strikingly similar happened before, although there were no outsiders in China to record the event and very few pictures remain. In late July of 1976, there was an even more catastrophic earthquake in China. More than 250,000 people died. The Olympic Games were underway in Montreal, and China played no part in them whatsoever. In those waning days of the Cultural Revolution, China refused almost all contact with the outside world. Mao Zedong lay on his deathbed, and great changes were about to take place. Memories fade. Even in China, people under the age of 40 have no personal recollection of the Cultural Revolution. Years when the thoughts of Chairman Mao were memorized and treasured as though they were biblical revelations. Gems like this. It is necessary for young intellectuals to live and work in the countryside and to be re-educated by the poor farmers. If some German entrepreneur had opened a beer garden on the outskirts of Munich, dressed an actor up in an old SS uniform, and then had him read excerpts from Hitler's Mein Kampf into a microphone, while a couple of hundred nostalgic Germans chowed down on bratwurst and sauerbraten, if that had happened, well, it wouldn't. It couldn't. But this cheerful horde of Chinese diners is embarking on a comparable evening of entertainment. After dinner and a bracing quantity of adult beverages, this crowd of nostalgia buffs will spend the next couple of hours on hard wooden benches recalling the good old days of the Cultural Revolution. This strutting, stylized, fist-pumping, flag-waving propaganda production was the only kind of entertainment permitted in China from the mid-60s to the mid-70s. The Chinese had no choices. All the while, anyone even remotely suspected of harboring personal ambitions or dreams of prosperity was harassed and tormented, forced to wear dunce caps, driven out into the poorest, most remote corners of China. Creative thinking, ambition of any kind, was stifled, smothered. And while this dinner theater production clearly does seem to elicit some pangs of nostalgia among older members of the audience, the younger people think it's a hoot. To many Chinese these days, the Cultural Revolution is better mocked than too carefully remembered. You may back then have thought about getting rich, but you didn't dare say it out loud. Now, it's all anybody talks about. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Everyone's in competition with everybody else. The woman sitting to my immediate right, Madame He Yongzhi, is one of the top dogs in Chongqing's booming economy. Rich beyond her own wildest dreams, yet still a little nostalgic for the old days.
In those days, people's thinking was very simple and humble, too. People thought less than they do now in these complicated times. Yes, we knew very little, but that doesn't mean our lives were worse.
You can't miss Madame He's restaurant-hotel complex. It dominates the skyline of this boom town, carved into a cliff overlooking the Jialing River. Like Chongqing itself, it's not subtle. This city is all about big investment, heavy manufacturing, massive construction. Like Madame He's entertainment complex, it's all about big dreams and instant fortunes.
I am proud of being rich. I made my money through hard work. And now that I have it, I can help others become rich too.
In Mingshan, capitalism personified. He's an automobile magnate. He endured hard labor, exile to the countryside, and starvation rations during the Cultural Revolution. But when I mentioned that bizarre dinner show to him, even he seems to get a little misty-eyed. It's almost as though they miss it, as though they're nostalgic for it. Explain that to me.
First of all, life in the countryside in the old days was very hard. But at the same time, it gave us a good life experience. Secondly, today's global competition is so fierce and came so fast, it made all of us, including myself, feel such heavy pressure. When they remember the old days, although life was very harsh, it was free. They used to dance and sing all the time. With the pressure you get today, you realize life in the old days was very simple. That is why some people even cry during that show.
The best of times, the worst of times. If you've got money, you can buy almost anything. Drugs, women, just be discreet. If you're poor, there are more chances to make money than anyone can remember. It's not perfect, but it's better than before. And who's making it possible? The government. Political freedom, the right to dissent, freedom for Tibet. There are lines you don't cross. Talk about anything you like, just don't get political. Listen to the music. The singer, she's adopted a Western name, Bethany, is the featured performer here at the Cotton Club. Speaks good English, but when the conversation gets complicated, she'll answer in Chinese. What is different in the Chinese social structure, in the morality, in a city like Chongqing that is growing so quickly?
Like any city that develops quickly, people are more or less lost in the transition. People become very shallow and curious about anything from the outside, and they often get confused. Take drugs, for example. Whenever there is a demand, there will be a supply. You can get whatever you want as long as you have money. Some rich men don't have time to look for real love, and still they need girls, so they come pick them up like fast food. And the pretty girls want a shortcut to get rich. This is why China has so many problems. Traditionally, homosexuality was illegal, but now it's not difficult for many people to accept such a thing.
Open homosexuality in China? Oh, yes. And some highly popular gay clubs where it's celebrated by men who say they don't think they will be gay forever. We'll show you. When night falls, almost every public square in Chongqing takes on a little magic. The music is piped in over speakers, and because it's free, which is the only price that everyone can afford, and because there's very little land available for any other kind of recreation, thousands of people, mostly middle-aged women, come to these squares and dance. It is at about this time that Ouyang begins to prepare for work. Ouyang is a drag performer.
When I had my first boyfriend, my father asked me, "Why do you have such a special relationship with that boy?" Of course, he meant gay relationship. My father said if this is an illness, we will find a doctor to cure it. But if this is what you are, that's okay.
The Ruyi Club is hardly the kind of place you expect to find in China's heartland. The club flourishes in the very heart of town and is packed every night with gays and lesbians and a few curious straights. It's pretty tame stuff for the most part, but for the past 60 years, China's been a rigidly puritanical country. The mere fact that this club is permitted to exist openly without police interference is almost certainly due to regular payoffs, but it's also a mark of China's changing values.
When the bar started, it was difficult. There was a lot of pressure from the cultural inspectors and the police, because this type of gay gathering was illegal, and the officials judged our drag show to be dirty and pornographic. But society has become more and more tolerant towards the gay community as a result of AIDS awareness.
AIDS in China is no longer perceived as only a gay disease, and some forms of treatment are becoming increasingly available. Anything, though, that even smacks of political expression crosses the line. Is there ever anything like a gay pride parade in Chongqing?
So far in China, in Chongqing and other cities, there is no gay pride parade. Society has not reached the level where gay people can express themselves in that way.
In China, family and children take on added significance. The young are expected to eventually take care of their elders. All men, gay or straight, are expected to continue the family line. And Ouyang says that at some point, he too will return to the closet.
China is a traditional country, and all my family wants is for me to get married. So I suspect that I will have to get married after I turn 30. This is a dilemma all Chinese gay men face, and eventually most of us follow tradition.
It is as though coming out of the closet in China is only a temporary stage of development, a passing phase. Everything we've been talking about here would still come as a massive shock to most Chinese, especially among people in the countryside, and that's a vast majority. Traditional values prevail. Sex of any kind remains a very private matter. But migrant workers, the men and women who are flocking to China's cities by the millions, are for the most part young people. Young and single, or young and separated from their families for long periods. As in many places around the world, the fact that they are also poor simply means that there is a huge demand for cheap sex.
You can see some coming up.
My colleague Nick Mackey, who lives in Chongqing, drove us through the low-end red light district. It may have existed before, but now these storefront brothels are all out in the open. We saw a whole bunch of police walking not far from here, right? It's quite obvious what these places are. It's against the law, but it goes on.
Absolutely, and it does beg the question, are these places paying some form of protection money to the local police to actually stay in operation? Prostitution is illegal, and these shops are fronts for prostitution.
A product to suit every pocketbook. There's more available than just a sing-along at Chongqing's karaoke clubs. The more money a customer's got, the more options he'll have to spend it. The Chinese are caught between the glittering promise of the future and the comfortable patterns of the past. For a few days every year during the Lunar New Year's holiday, the past reestablishes its hold. Tradition prevails throughout China. Those who are not home, go home. By the hundreds of thousands, they flood Chongqing's train and bus stations and head for the villages where they were born and where their ancestors are buried. The young girl there, that's Li Dan. She's home from boarding school, walking up into the hills of her home village, Dragon Spring, with her mother and father to visit the grave of her maternal grandmother. Fireworks to frighten away evil spirits. Tradition. The mother, Jin Gonglu, had told me last fall that she was fed up with her husband, that she would leave him right after the new year and find a job in the city. Her daughter, Li Dan, was horrified, warned her mother that she would leave school if that happened.
My aunt says people in the city look down on us villagers, and I worry about the type of work there.
Jin Gonglu says there was never any love between her and her husband. His family treated her horribly, and he's often drunk.
When Li Dan was born, her father and his family were not pleased. They hoped to have a boy. My mother-in-law did not want us to stay at her home because I gave birth to a daughter, so we were thrown out. That's typical of the older generation.
But the biggest issue between them was over spending the money to send Li Dan, a girl, to boarding school. Jin Gonglu will endure almost anything to keep her child in school. She will even stay in Dragon Spring. Indeed, she has found a second job, working for a local caterer, preparing banquets for wedding celebrations like this one. The extra money will help pay the tuition. The caterer wanted no part of her husband. He drinks too much. He works well enough for an hour or two, but then, eventually, he passes out. Jin Gonglu keeps on working. Her husband keeps on drinking. It's far from universal in China, but under the old ways, this kind of thing happened all too often. But tradition is changing all over China. That is exactly what Jin Gonglu's sacrifice is intended to achieve for Li Dan, a complete break with precisely that kind of tradition. Without such a head start, though, a young woman's options in the city are limited. What are these girls going to do? Young girls, Li Dan's age, also from outside the big city. They're nice girls, they come from good families. They could work on an assembly line, perhaps they'd earn $20 or $25 a week. But they want to make a lot of money. And all they've got is their youth and their good looks. And so they come to work in a place like this, where some of the girls can earn $20 in an evening. It's a karaoke bar. They tend to run the gamut from gaudy to tacky to sleazy. This is one of the better ones, somewhere between gaudy and tacky. Jackie Lee is only 25 years old, but he's the manager of this KTV club.
This is a business club. Lots of businessmen come here. They negotiate, and many agreements are even reached here.
That's true. All kinds of agreements are reached in places like this, between businessmen or with a cop or local official whose help on one project or another may be useful. Many wheels are greased at karaoke clubs. There's a lot of drinking and singing, but at the center of it all are the young women.
What I see as the girls' job is to cheer everybody up. They can sing well. They can drink a lot. And they are very good at improving the mood in the room. Because everyone comes here for fun.
There's a boisterous public area where the customers sit and ogle the young women. But the reason the girls wear numbers is to advertise their availability and to encourage the customers to rent a hostess for the evening. Some of these karaoke clubs are just thinly disguised brothels. This place, says Jackie Lee, is not. The first thing we do, he says, is spell out what the job involves.
The second point we tell our girls, our company's principle is, treat our customers as God. So we must provide good service.
Off the main floor, corridor after corridor of private rooms. Field producer Zhang Yongning takes me to VIP room 888.
888. Luck is the number of all.
And here, too, the girls parade in until the customer finds what he's looking for. Most of them look terribly young and vulnerable. And they are.
我叫李彤，今年18。
赵娇，17。我叫白银，19岁。
周玉洁，18岁。
Do you recognize them? 3 of them, and they come from the same town, are the girls you first met when they were shopping. They admit that it's a thin line in a place like this between entertaining a customer and entertaining a customer.
Some customers will always try to grope us.
Do you think when they come here, they expect that maybe some of you will go home with them?
Yes, definitely.
No girl from this club, they were quick to add, though, would go home with a client. In some karaoke bars, the girls go home with the customers, right?
There are many, but I want to do what is right.
So, now that you think about it, was this a good idea? Leaving your hometown and coming here?
It's worth it. No, I should be in school. At the end of the year, I will go home and go into the clothing business.
Which is exactly what she did. Bai Yin went home to the town of Tongliang and is now working in a local clothing shop.
Working in a club like that, it's very hard to remain respectable. So it's probably better just not to be there.
Her father has no idea that she worked as a hostess in Chongqing. Her mother clearly suspects something and is adamant that her daughter will not be returning to the city.
We just want our family to be safe and to live a simple life. We want to keep to ourselves because it's hard to tell who is good and who is bad.
This little town is famous throughout China. This is where the fire dragon dance was born about 2,200 years ago. They perform it annually for the Lunar New Year. It's quite a tradition. But tradition is about honoring the past. The question is how a young person without an education can build a future. Well, why not? The Great Wall is an extended, essentially endless fashion runway. Designer Karl Lagerfeld considers the setting enchanting and entirely logical.
It's built to be a runway, you know, they don't have to fight against the Mongolians anymore.
It is certainly where LVMH, owner of Fendi, Tag Heuer, Louis Vuitton, Dom Perignon, the biggest luxury goods group in the world, wants to be. China. This enormous potential marketplace for all things Western. 40% of LVMH's world sales are generated in Asia. And right now, what defines luxury in China is an expensive import. Quality, creativity, and innovation are not seen as originating in China. Please note, the designer and many of the models and celebrities have been imported. China's wealthy have a thing for all things foreign. And more to the point, they'll pay for it. Fashion design, urban design. Someday, no doubt, the Chinese will appreciate their own creations. For the moment, though, they place a higher value on anything produced by foreigners.
This is your baby, right? Yeah, I took a major role. This project's in excess of 30 million square feet, which is probably bigger than all but 3 or 4 dozen American cities. It cost in the neighborhood of $50 to $60 billion US, which in China's means more because the dollar goes a lot further here.
Ben Wood is an American architect employed by the billionaire developer Vincent Lo. He directs a staff that is primarily Chinese.
American architects, because of their status of pretty much dominating the economy for so long, we've been
to places that China's on the way to becoming. And so when we design a 5-star hotel or a luxury resort in the southern Himalayas, we have been to a luxury resort in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We've not only been there, we've stayed there. We've experienced it. If I tell my staff we're now going to design a boutique hotel in Lhasa, and it's going to attract the rich and famous, they have no idea where to start. Because they've never been to one, they've never met a rich and famous person. They're just as smart, just as bright, just as well trained, but they don't have the life experience that translates into design.
Chongqing is college educated with a master's degree in filmmaking. Ever since he spent his junior year of high school as an exchange student in Washington State, he goes by the name Alan. He may be Chongqing's most artistic fashion photographer, but that's an observation Alan would consider damning with faint praise. You said to me, this is a cultural desert.
Yeah.
Chongqing.
Yeah.
Why?
Because everything is developing. And the focus now here is in economic development.
Everything is about making money.
Yeah. That's what I feel.
Indeed, Alan is producing provocative ads to do just that, make money for his clients and himself. But he doesn't consider his work genuinely creative.
Sometimes I just feel my imagination, my minds are blocked. And I feel it's very terrible. My mind is empty. I could not create anything.
Why do you think that is so? Why do you think there is more creativity in the West than here in China?
I think it's a result of the Chinese education. Because the Chinese education does not encourage students to creative or imagine. They just tell you 1 is 1, 2 is 2, and don't forget it. 1 and 1 is 2. Yeah, so no imagination.
Vincent Lo is one of the biggest investors in Chongqing. The system that Alan perceives as stifling creativity, Lo sees as providing the stability essential for economic development.
I believe the political system for China at this point in time is very effective for the country.
I have always been told that what Chinese governments fear the most is chaos.
I'm sure that that's something we are all concerned about too. It's not just the government. If this is very chaotic, I don't think I'll be investing billions of dollars into the city. We need stability in order that we can do business.
Stability tolerates, even requires safety valves. Prostitution doesn't threaten China's political stability. Indeed, it allows young men to let off steam. A lot goes on inside those karaoke bars, but they are hardly hotbeds of political activism. Gay bars? Yes. Gay pride parades? Not on your life. And while it may not seem that religion belongs in that company, in China it too can be illegal but tolerated. Alan Chun recently converted to Christianity. As part of his search for moral values, Alan now meets every Tuesday night with a Bible study group. What did you find in religion that you didn't have before?
The purpose of life.
And that purpose is what?
The purpose is connect my own life with God's wish. I think it's very important. I was thinking about to achieve my dream, driving a new car, bigger car, expensive car, living in a bigger house. But now, I feel my purpose of life must be connected to the purpose of God. Why He made me. I need to connect myself with my God.
And that kind of God, a personal, comforting, apolitical, non-interfering kind of God, is perfectly in keeping with the goals and aspirations of the Chinese government. The Roman Catholic Church, for example, remains officially illegal. But Rome and Beijing seem to be moving toward accommodation. And Catholics these days are rarely persecuted by the government. The government does not tolerate the spiritual practices of Falun Gong. At its peak, 70 million members strong. There was a silent protest in 1999. 10,000 Falun Gong gathered in front of party headquarters in Beijing. That scared the government, and Falun Gong has been out of bounds ever since.
It's okay for you to become a Christian.
Yeah.
That's no problem.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to join Falun Gong,
oh, no.
that would be a big problem.
Yeah.
Why?
Why? Because the government said it's bad.
I understand.
And we are citizens. It's responsibility to follow the government's orders. And I think the government's order should be respected. There must be a reason for them to do it. I believe in my government, yeah.
Which is also a form of faith, blind faith. Things in China are getting better, therefore, what the government is doing must be right. There they were one morning, looking very determined and very much alone in front of Chongqing's Court of Appeals building. What was unclear is just what they were protesting. What was absolutely clear is that they weren't going to move on their own until somebody inside agreed to listen to their complaint. There are, according to the Chinese government's own statistics, tens of thousands of protests and demonstrations every year reflecting public unhappiness. But how do you measure happiness in China? Imperfectly, which is to say, by taking a poll. This group of roving Gallup pollsters has traveled across China collecting Chinese opinions. The Gallup organization has been sampling public opinion in China since 1994 and is limited by the government to asking market research questions, determining what the Chinese consumer wants. For this particular survey, researchers conducted about 3,000 face-to-face interviews. Respondents were asked to rank their happiness on a scale of 1 to 10. Su Zhe, a school teacher, ranked hers at 6.
The Chinese economy is growing very fast, and people are able to own property. I think this is a good thing. It's bringing us closer to Western standards. I hope my child will get a good education.
People seem so focused on making money now and providing a better life for their children down the road that there's almost no discussion of the freedoms they don't have.
The majority of the consumers in this market are happy with the status quo of their life. You know, I think compared to what happened 5 years ago, I think now they have more ownership of consumer products.
Wu Tao is the director of research for Gallup in China.
But I think people are also more hopeful about what's going to be happening in their lives. So generally, if you think about the consumers, if you look at the data, I think they're quite upbeat about the future. They're quite optimistic about the future.
Optimism extends to the poorest in society. Gallup asks people to compare their lives 5 years ago to what they expect 5 years from now. Among 143 nations polled, only a handful of countries can match China's huge leap in optimism. Even Alan Chun, the fashion photographer who's desperately searching for creativity and innovation, doesn't understand how dissent and political freedom might play a useful role.
Because when I say to you, is it possible to have different ideas in China about how things should be done politically? You say to me, no, I love my country,
I love the government. The government is doing everything to help the country. So it's not up to me to be creative in that area. Do you see the connection? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I noticed now, just now you said, Alan, you said you love your country, you love your government, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but I noticed one word you use is love. I have to say that I love my country, but I don't love my government. I trust my government.
Interesting point.
I think it's different.
Vincent Lo agrees.
I have studied and lived in Western world, but unfortunately, democracy, of course, it sounds good, but in practice, it doesn't always bring you the results. And a lot of criticism have been put on China, saying that this is a one-party system, human rights and everything else, but this is a system that has helped China come to where it is in such a short time, in that past 30 years.
Nor will you get much argument out of Lo's American architect, Ben Wood.
He and I both agree that the best way to solve those problems is not by rampant democracy. It's by controlled change informed by some very smart people over time. And with that in mind, I think over the next 20 years, a third of all new Chinese people will live in a place like this.
Now that's an American talking, sort of pissing on democracy.
No, I'm a former jet fighter pilot, loyal to the country. Not at all. I'm just saying I live with these people, so I can appreciate what it's going to take to get them from here to here.
If China is to adopt a Western-style democracy today, I don't think I would have so much confidence to invest all this money into China.
Why? What do you think the consequence would be?
Because I'm sure the development would be very different, and the focus will be very different. And I don't think I would be doing big projects like this in a city like Chongqing.
Because now you have stability, now you have confidence in what will happen 5 years from now.
We can see continuity. We can see a very clear objective and goal for the government to pursue and for us as business people to pursue. And we can work hand in hand for the good of the place.
Vincent Lo worries that political freedom might actually lead to economic instability. Alan Chun has never known political freedom and is quite prepared to accept the government's assurance that he doesn't need it. My question is, if people want to get together, let's say in the countryside, and protest corruption, then the police will come and they will break up the demonstration and they will not allow it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you say, oh, really? You don't know that?
I don't know. I have never seen that.
I know you haven't seen it. You know why you haven't seen it?
Why?
Because television cannot report it.
Oh.
Because the newspapers cannot report it. Because anyone who is there, if they take a photograph, they will be arrested.
Okay.
That's why you don't know about it, right? I don't want to get you in trouble. I don't want to make you say something you don't want to say.
No, it's fine.
But you don't seem to care about that.
Yeah.
You don't?
Not very clear about that part. I don't, yeah.
Because?
There must be a reason for government to do that. And I really believe in Chinese government because we can see that people here live in a better life than before. And I don't think the people who wrote something on the street or sitting on the street are smart. They are not smart. I don't think it's a best way to do that. For me, I don't think it's smart.
Which brings us back to that couple on the courthouse steps. The fact that they were treated courteously, even gently, certainly owed something to the fact that our foreign camera crew happened to be on the scene. But that's precisely the point. A few years ago, our cameraman would have been arrested, and the tape would have been confiscated. Some things change slowly in China, but they are changing. What was the protest about? When we contacted the Justice Ministry, no one would say. Indeed, no one would acknowledge that it even happened. Nothing so epitomizes China's hunger for all things Western as its ravenous appetite for the foreign car. So, if the Chinese could have any car in the world, you know what many, if not most of them, would choose? An American car, a Buick, a black Buick.
The Buick popular cars in Chongqing, and they like black cars because that represents elegance and status.
Over the last year, General Motors sold more Buicks in China than in the United States. This won't do much for morale in Dearborn or Detroit, but GM and Ford can barely keep up with the demand in China. Nor is this likely to make American auto workers feel any better. As soon as they work out their safety and emissions problems, the Chinese will begin exporting their cars to the United States. We'll tell you all about it